So much tech because we are amazing.
Greetings, everybody. We're just getting logged on before we start the conversation. But welcome, everybody. And if for some reason I'm not seeing your questions in the chat, please feel free to email them and we'll try to respond to them later because I'm not sure how many things I can look at all at once. We'll find out. We're just waiting to get our Instagram up and running because we're living in the future, really.
So future, much fancy.
Did Jessica invite me?
Jessica did invite you.
Go live with Jessica. Okay. Am I live with Jessica?
You are. We have done the tech
Awesome.
things. Good for us.
Woohoo! I feel good about it.
Yeah.
All right. Welcome everybody. Jess, are you ready to rock and roll?
Ready, excited, all the things.
All right, here we go. So welcome. It is 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we are here with Move the Needle, tools for women, femmes, and thems having in voting blue in red communities. I'm trying to remember that off the top of my head. I am Patricia Berry, and I'm trying to move my slide forward, and we're seeing what
You
happens.
can't because you're on the last slide.
Oh my goodness. All right,
So
nobody
an
look at the
update
slides.
for Instagram folks. We are doing this simultaneously on Instagram and Zoom. Unfortunately, on Instagram, we can't show both our beautiful faces and our beautiful slides at the same time. So we'll talk you through all the content. And for folks on Zoom, you will see our beautiful faces and our beautiful content. And if you would like to see all of the things together at once, this will be uploaded to YouTube after the fact and everything will be there. We will also be sending a follow-up email next week. And if you'd like to get on that, there will be a slide at the end saying how you can register for the Zoom. So you did it. You got to the
Thank
right
you.
path. Well
I'm back
done.
at the first slide and nobody looked at all the slides in between, so you'll be surprised when they get there.
All
So
right.
again,
So,
I'm going to try this one more time.
okay.
Welcome everybody to Move the Needle, tools for white women, femmes, and thems, voting blue in red communities. And everybody's welcome. Jessica, will you
Everybody
tell us
is
who this is
welcome.
for?
Yeah, so we've designed the content specifically for white women, femmes, and thems. If this is not you, but you'd like to learn more or bring these learnings to friends and family who are white women, femmes, and thems, you are absolutely welcome. This content is actually universally applicable. What we focused on was the specific intersectionality of whiteness and folks who have been acculturated as women, especially in the United States and Western culture. And I'm so excited that in our mailbag of questions and comments at the very end, we're going to get a little bit more into why specifically white women as opposed to women in general. So welcome. If you're here, you're supposed to be, and we're glad you are.
So we're doing this each Sunday evening until November 10th, which is the Sunday evening after the election. And we go live on Zoom and Instagram because we're living in the future and we can do that technology at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So Zoom and Instagram live, and we'll tell you at the end how to get on our mailing list. So, Jess.
First up, let's get into our working agreements. And you guys, I am excited that today we are going to talk about what working agreements are and how to create them. For now, we're just going to go through what Patricia's and mine are with each other and the agreements that we are inviting all of you to. The first one is put aside the right to comfort. In this space, it is not a safe space, it's a brave space because the world that we're trying to address is not safe. Over the course of the series, we're going to continue to talk about comfort and privilege and how to put ourselves in uncomfortable learnings. But for the sake of today's this moment's working agreement, it is put aside the right to comfort.
And our second working agreement is resist binary thinking. I particularly have taken this to heart as a learning experience because the situation that you're in at any given moment with a particular person or group or community will change what the best way to proceed is in any conversation, anything. So binary thinking just gives us a right or wrong answer when really what we need to be able to do is move along the line of what is appropriate in this moment and with the person that is in front of us. So resisting binary thinking of right and wrong is where we're going to play in.
The third working agreement is welcome generative conflict. In dominant culture in the Midwest, where we both are, in the South, where I am originally from, as women, as people acculturated as women, we are often rewarded for being nice instead of being real and for being conciliatory instead of leaning into necessary conflict and disagreement. So in this space, I would like to invite us to allow a lot of emotional space to be in conflict with each other, with the ideas being presented, and sometimes even with ourselves.
And one thing I'll say about that is I often get kind of tagged as being somebody who likes a lot of conflict, when really what I'm trying to be is direct. And that's a Midwest thing that what we're asking all of us. Well, actually, that's kind of a blanket term. Maybe it's not a Midwest thing. It's a white woman thing. But looking at directness as not necessarily conflict, but ways to be honest about what we're experiencing and go forward with that. And then fourth, ask for the speed we need. So we're not looking for comfort, right? We said at the beginning, we have no right to comfort, but we do have the right to put a placeholder in a conversation that we need to think about or an issue that we need to think about. And one of the ways that I do that in my conversations with Jess is often I will share with her what my gut instinct is, but I'll ask her, can I think about it for a day and get back to you again and just take a look at why I think like that. So asking for the speed that we need as we go through this is part of having a thoughtful response to what is often difficult content. So,
And we are your hosts.
and this is
Patricia
our
Berry,
faces.
that's right. Portraits done by the delightful and amazingly talented Ypsilanti artist Yen Zaro. We have both had the opportunity to work with her in a number of contexts, and she has done these really lovely portraits. So I am Jessica Letaw. Most people call me Jess. I am a cis, white, queer woman, originally from the South, currently living in the Midwest. I'll talk about why I'm here in a moment, but I move through the world as a community organizer for abundant and affordable housing and racial justice. I think about almost all of my work in those contexts. And I am always looking for ways to be more just and more kind, both to the world and to myself. And that definitely feels like a steep learning edge right now.
And I am Patricia Berry. I am a cis, white, straight, salty as fuck Buddhist woman in a relationship with a cis, white, straight man, which will come into our conversations often about how to have loving conversations with community members and loved ones. So that's who I am. And then why we're here. So the whys for me is I really came into this work with Jess. I want to build our capacity to have brave conversations with people that we love about things that are important and hard to talk about. What my other job is as a fundraiser and a person who works in philanthropy, talking about how we exchange wealth to create good work in the world. And it has really brought me into thinking about how do we have hard conversations about taboo subjects, which money is one of them. And Jess?
For me, I'm thinking a lot about the upcoming election, the upcoming presidential election, and all of the choices that we're going to have down ballot in terms of Congress, senators, House of Representatives, state House and Senate, all the way down to city councils and county commissions. And how we show up and whether we show up to the polls matters every single time. But turnout can often be kind of low. And so I'm really interested in what it means to motivate more people to get to the ballot box, understanding that a lot of folks feel deeply disenfranchised and deeply, I think, not disenlightened, what's the word, but disappointed by our systems of government and leadership. Having said that, the election is, at the presidential level, is for the most part going to be decided by about 6% of the voters, the ones that are in swing communities.
I'm sorry, that gave me a little headache.
And I think that that is intense, but also a really interesting opportunity. And as a white woman who frequently works in spaces with white people and white women, to understand how we show up to justice work and change work, it felt very urgent to be a part of this moment. And so I want us, white women, to change white women's voting behavior in swing communities. If you are in a swing state, if you are in a swing county, and you hold one or more of these identities, I'm hoping that what Patricia and I are going to be doing over the next several weeks is helping you build muscles to have difficult conversations and make necessary change.
Let's talk the politics. Bring it home, Jess.
So I wanted to make sure that I was grounding us in this specific moment. Now we are 80 something days away from the election. Kamala Harris has yet to drop her full policy platform, but she did announce this past week her first 100 days. A lot of it is focused on the economy and economic development, including proposing price increase limits for groceries, which would be amazing. She has funding plans for both affordable and market rate housing that build on funding plans and action plans that are currently underway under the Biden administration, but it either accelerates or more greatly funds those programs, and has a plan to lower prescription costs. So she's really talking about meeting Americans at the wallet as well as the ballot box. I also wanted to talk about the fact that today is the 104th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, frequently acknowledged as the amendment that grants women, white women, the right to vote. Really, what the amendment says is you could not block a voter based on sex, based on gender. That has shown up in all kinds of shenaniganery ways. And I think it's really
Shenaniganery
important.
award.
Yes, as of right now.
Okay.
But I do want to make sure, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get into the mailbag, but just again wanted to highlight that the anniversary of the amendment in 1920 was really explicitly geared towards white women, and the white women suffragists and suffragettes who were working at the time, many or most of them explicitly excluded their sisters of color, including Black women, Indigenous women, Latino women, really everybody outside of white and white proximity women. And it's important to continue to reckon with that history. In 1920, white women were granted more or less unfettered access to the ballot box. Women of color didn't follow along until nearly 50 years later. And the last thing that I wanted to highlight is that this coming week is the Democratic National Convention. Where is it streaming? Yes, it is streaming absolutely everywhere. This is the first year that the Democratic Party is credentialing content creators. So if you are at all online, you are going to see things about the Democratic National Convention. I don't remember the full lineup, but the first day, I believe, is President Biden and Hillary Clinton will be making remarks. The second day is, I believe, President Obama. The third day is Bill Clinton and prospective Vice President Tim Walz. And then the fourth day is Kamala Harris and somebody else amazing that I'm spacing on. But the DNC, I highly encourage folks to participate. This is definitely home team vibes, right? Like, we're going to be talking about challenging conversations. Do not sit down to this with your very Republican uncle. That's not going to set you up for a good time. Unless, smartassery sparring is the kind of thing you enjoy. But if you are looking for some affirmation, especially if you are feeling isolated as a Democrat voter in a Republican family or a Republican community, tapping into the DNC for vibes, for energy, for information is going to be wonderful. But in terms of move the needle, maybe a little bit to the side.
All right, let's get into it. Boundaries and loving agreements.
Can I just say, I'm so excited for this. In part
This is just to comment on our friendship. This is over the 10 years that I've known, I don't know how long we've known each other, forever. This is one of the things that has taught me to not only be a better friend, but like really just overall a better human. And particularly, as I move in spaces where I'm not the majority, to think about boundaries and other people get to have boundaries. I'm not the center of the universe, loving agreements like that. It has just really added so much to my life. And I feel like you have really, and in our relationship, in our conversations, we've really dug into that. So it's the way I have hard conversations with everybody. So how to have a challenging conversation, because Jess does that all the time. I do that a lot of the times, not as much as Jess in politics in Southeast Michigan, which is, like many political spaces, sometimes a little rough and tumble. But it's a way to help us create kind of really muscular containers that holds these challenging conversations. So without further ado, we're going to talk about the different kinds of boundaries.
Which is true. And I just want to put just a tiny bit more context around the why of this conversation and why now. We are going to be talking so much about what to talk about and why and how that if you just try to jump into a hard conversation without setting the stage for it, you are setting yourself and the other person up for failure. It's a little bit of a running joke that's haha because it's true with my friends and family that I love a good boundary. I love a good boundary. I find that it keeps me saner and helps me have much more resilient relationships, friendships, loving ships, situation, no, not situationships, but all of these different ways to connect with folks. I feel like I can be braver and bigger in the relationships because of the boundaries. I also want to highlight that we will talk about working agreements and loving agreements interchangeably, same thing. Working agreements shows up in workspaces, loving agreements shows up in personal and loving spaces. No difference between the two except how you implement them and maybe the language that you use. So thank you for that. Okay, boundaries. I just love a boundary.
Okay. Sure.
I know.
Sure.
All right. So enough fangirling of boundaries. Why? I got so excited. I lost track a little bit of what I want to talk about. I think where I'd like to start is by peeling this concept apart a bit. I won't generalize, but I'll say for myself that a lot of times I think of any request that I make in a relationship as a boundary. I am setting a boundary because I am asking you to do something, or I am setting a boundary when I am telling you I'm going to do something. And it's actually a lot more nuanced than that. I highly encourage folks who would love to do a little bit more reading on this to look up Prentice Hemphill, whose quote by now is quite
Can you
famous.
spell that for me?
Yes,
P-R-E-N.
T-I-S-S.
Okay.
Last name Hemphill, Hemphill.
Gotcha.
Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. Essentially, I am creating the kind of green space and fence needed for both of us to be able to access each other with no surprises, with,
Hmm.
kind of straightforward expectations. I would also highly, highly, highly encourage folks to look up Nedra Tawwab. Nedra, her first name is Nedra, last name Tawwab, Tawwab, who does a phenomenal amount of work, deftly unpacking the difference between boundaries and ultimatums. She has a whole book called Set Boundaries, Find Peace that has come out in the last year or two. And if it had come out 15 years ago, I think today I would have different relationships with some of my family members because I would have learned some things a little bit faster and a little bit sooner. Prentice also has a book out this year called What It Takes to Heal, How Transforming Ourselves Can Change the World. And while that is not germane to tonight's topic, it's just lovely and wonderful. So Prentice and Nedra have done a lot of work around boundaries and all of these concepts. I also encourage you to, if you'd like to do a little online reading, the Gottman Institute has done a lot of work teasing out what making requests within relationships means. And so now I'd like to get into these 3.5 terms. First of all, is a request. Essentially, you are asking for what you need with no consequence. The Gottman Institute describes requests as unenforceable statements. Can you please do X? And that's it. A boundary is asking for what you need and expressing what you'll do if that's not met.
So
The
request consequence.
request consequence. The original action is out of your control, but your response is not. The consequence is not. An ultimatum is asking for what you need with a threat as a consequence, meaning you are attempting to control the action through a kind of manipulation. And I want to put an asterisk on that. The ultimatums are not always a bad thing. Sometimes an emotional escalation is required in order to be heard, but constantly operating on ultimatums is deeply unhealthy, both for you and for the other person or people.
Hmm.
I'd like to maybe just do quick examples for these, just so we together understand what these look like. And maybe Patricia, if you have examples that you can think of, I would love to know what examples look like for you.
Well, it's interesting. Before we started talking about this conversation and you broke it down these ways, I think I was using boundaries for each one of these with like no nuance,
Mhm.
right? So I'm in like I said, a loving relationship with a cis white male, um, who he and I are both working really hard on kind of being grown-ups in the relationship that, we want to heal some stuff that we've done before, as well as I'm a person who divorced my family really early, most of my family, not all of my family. Probably in a very ultimatum sort of way. I don't even know if I gave him the ultimatum. I was just like, you're doing the best you can, and that's not good enough for me. So I'm withdrawing. So requests for me, I always thought were boundaries, but like they're loving requests. And because you're in a loving relationship, like, you know, um, if I say to my beloved, can you please not stack the dishes in the sink because I can't do the dishes when the dishes are in the sink. I have a very small apartment. If you could stack them next to the sink, that's a request, right? So the boundary would be if you stack the dishes in the sink, I'm not doing the dishes. And then the ultimatum would be what? What would be the version of the ultimatum be in that case?
Sometimes it's a matter of tone and temperature.
Uh-huh.
The boundary is if the dishes are in, if you don't take the dishes out of the sink, I can't do the dishes.
Hmm.
An ultimatum could sound like, if you don't take the dishes out of the sink, I'm not doing the dishes, right? Like same words, entirely different tone and temperature.
Mhm.
And also the consequence feels different, right? Like in the
Right.
first one, the consequence is the dishes don't get done. In the second one, the implied consequence is I'm gonna be mad.
So the example that I'll give within not only my beloved, but my larger community of very liberal humans that I live amongst, um, one of the requests that I've made recently is, can we tone down the bashing, right? I want to have meaningful conversations about things that I need to know and that I can act on. But I don't want to just have this constant grind and litany of, the stupid people on the other side and, jokes and belittling and all that stuff, which I get. Like I said, I'm a salty as fuck human and I love a good snap. But it's one of the things that I think in this election cycle, and probably for the last 10 or 15 years, has just made me more and more feel hopeless. And I just don't want to be in that space. So a request that I would make would be, can we talk about it in ways like this, that it's more action oriented, information focused, fact based, and less personal attacks? If I was to set a boundary around that, which I have not had to do in this community that I've been having this discussion in, I would say, or if you guys want to have that discussion, I'll leave the room. So I've given you an alternative to that. So far, I don't believe that I've gotten into any ultimatums. Um, and grief, we could talk about. We're going to have longer stories about grief, but those are essentially my three boundaries. Do you feel like that is the kind of examples that you were looking for?
Oh, 100%,
Yeah.
100%. An example that I read recently specific to the election is, when you start talking politics with somebody who, A, doesn't necessarily have practice talking about politics because it falls in this weird taboo space. I don't want to say weird. It falls into a taboo space for a lot of families, communities, cultures to be able to talk or not talk about politics, and it can escalate really quickly into yelling or talking over or past one another. So an example that I heard recently is, if you raise your voice when talking about this, I'm going to leave the room
Mm-hmm.
and I'll come back when the emotional temperature has dropped a few degrees.
Or you've changed
So,
the subject.
or you've changed the subject. And I want to segue from there into not just setting the boundaries, which may or may not be expressed to the other person, sometimes appropriate, sometimes more appropriate just to tell yourself, this is what I'm going to do to keep myself safe and or sane. If somebody starts bringing personal at me attacks into a political conversation, I am going to physically withdraw from that conversation. You don't necessarily have to express that to the other person. What is important is that once you set that boundary, that you stick to it. That's
But
really
it's
important,
not
both for
something that you
you,
move around. Yeah.
exactly, for you and for the other person. That kind of consistency helps build your trust in
Hmm.
yourself and the other person's trust in you. And that actually brings us directly to grief. There's a quote on the Gottman Institute website that I wanted to bring in, which says, setting and enforcing our boundaries means accepting the limits of our control and releasing illusions of control that keep us stuck in unchanging situations. It means respecting our needs enough to make hard choices to protect them.
Hmm.
They go on to say, grief is an enormous part of the boundary setting process. While setting boundaries is a very self respecting and powerful thing to do, it's often accompanied by loss and sadness. And in order to effectively set boundaries, we must accept this part of the process too.
Hmm.
Sometimes setting boundaries will escalate to the point of not being able to be in relationship with a person, which is a profound loss and grief. But there are a lot of smaller griefs. I don't know if I want to say smaller, but that don't have to rise to the level of losing a relationship,
Mhm.
um, without still experiencing that sadness. I know that, and we'll talk about this more in a moment, but I stopped being able to talk about politics with my mother almost a decade ago because
Mm.
we could not reach agreement
Yeah.
about what it meant to have that discussion in a healthful way.
Hmm.
I really missed being able to talk to my mom about that. I talked
Well,
to my
and it being such a tremendous part of the fabric of your life,
Mhm.
it's like, and this was one of the reasons that I distanced myself from my mother, not necessarily from politics, but I led a life where we were having conversations about deep things, both professionally and personally, and sometimes really hard stuff, that my mother just didn't want to talk about. Like, she never wanted to have a discussion where she would feel discomfort
Mhm.
or feel like, that generative conflict was not verboten. We did not do that. And that was one of the reasons that I felt like, you know what, you loved me the best you could, and you're not ready to come into this space. You are who you are. I don't think that I had ill will towards her, but I just recognized that she didn't know who I was. And that is a tremendous grief,
Mhm.
and I think, you know, even for the friendships that I've lost over the last 10 years, like very old friendships, but it's because I'm setting better boundaries over the last 10 years. I'm getting healthier. I'm making requests that sometimes make them feel uncomfortable and that they take personally when it was just, I need to make this request or else I will do this.
Mhm.
And they, rather than take it as I can care for this person in this moment, it seems like an easy thing to ask, to not talk about that this way, to not yell, to not denigrate. Like, it seems like, but then suddenly they had this feeling that, like, is she saying I'm a bad person? I'm like saying, you get to be whoever you want. I just can't be in that space. So the grief of losing friendships and social circles, because I talk more directly about race, particularly among my white friends and colleagues, in a way that is including all of us in the work that needs to be done. You can either take it personally or you can take it as a call, as an invitation. But there is certainly a lot of people that have fallen away from my life. And um, there is grief associated with that, but there's also space that's created for other people to come in and be invited into the work and into the conversation. And I feel like in a lot of ways my life has gotten richer, but it doesn't discount the sadness of the things that we couldn't find a way to make the agreement work. And
Both can be
the
true.
other one thing that I wanted to talk about is, I don't know if anybody else has this problem, but sometimes I have a hard time recognizing when I need to set a boundary. And one of the ways that I do that is checking into my body. If I'm
Mm. Mhm.
having in a discussion, if I'm having, and again, I don't know whether anybody else has this experience, I'll shut down, like something's happening and I'm going to put on my placid face so nobody knows that I'm upset, but I've got a feeling in my chest. It's usually in my chest.
Mhm.
And one of the things that Jess taught me in our conversations was saying, I'm having a feeling and I need to just say it and kind of put a pin in this so that I can process it. You guys go on with your conversation or whatever's happening.
Mhm.
I'm just going to sit here a little bit quietly for a moment. But checking into, if you are feeling discomfort, is it discomfort because I feel attacked? Or is it discomfort because I feel like this conversation or this interaction is going outside my values that I've set?
The physical point is a great one. Do I feel physically uncomfortable? And definitely, I get really important cues from my body in my chest, in the back of my neck. My tongue will get thick. Sometimes my brain will get fuzzy. Another clue for me is if I am feeling confused by the conversation, if I have stopped tracking that means that something's out of whack. We're not having the same conversation, or we're out of alignment on how we're talking about what we're talking about. And that comes back to asking for the speed that we need. Can we slow down? Because I think I've missed something. And sometimes that'll circle back to a request and sometimes it won't. But definitely getting that clarity is really, really helpful.
Mhm.
And requests, boundaries, and ultimatums all hopefully come after setting loving agreements, at least in the context of these political conversations, having tough conversations with people that you love, or the male person, or whoever it is that you're talking to. Having agreements is just really key in being able to kind of carry the water of those. Patricia, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, like, bring
Mhm.
us into the space.
I really have loved, like I said, this conversation has been so rich that Jess and I have had as we've prepared for this. But loving agreements are just that, we create them so that the person that we're going into what is potentially a difficult conversation, um, that we're both working with the same ideas and the same preliminary requests and boundaries. What they look like, I don't know whether we had them on a slide, but like I can give you
Mhm.
an example of how Jess and I have worked on loving agreements. And I'll put this in a business context. So one of the things that I work on, and I worked with Jess at one point with her nonprofit and the board. And boards of nonprofits are notoriously dysfunctional. And I would say it's because they don't have loving agreements about how they're going to show up for each other. And so we created, in a business sense, with the board of her nonprofit, these agreements that I would term loving agreements. I don't think we used the word love. And I think we used working agreements. But one of them was we show up on time and we show up often. So, and we donate and we talk about money and we revisit these agreements for how we want to be in this room with each other, which one of the agreements, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, is assume good intent.
Yep.
So assume that everybody's doing the best they can in this situation. And that, I have to say, was one of the most transformative board experiences that I ever had, because all of them created the agreements together. And every time they met, they revisited the agreements. It was always on the back of the agenda. And they said to themselves, are these the correct agreements? Do we need to add anything? Do we need to delete anything? Like, there was a good 10 minutes of every conversation that recentered them in the conversation. So, like, that's a business example. A personal example would be,
I can
going
do
into a
one here.
conversation. Say that one more time.
I can do one here.
Oh, please do. Yeah. Thank
At
you.
the beginning of the pandemic, my partner at the time and I, of course, were going into lockdown, deeply uncertain about our work situations, about our social situations, about our financial situations, like everything. Do you remember the early days
Oh,
of
yeah.
lockdown when it felt like the world got upended every day and a half? And I remember thinking at the very beginning, the nonprofit that Patricia was referring to was Building Matters Ann Arbor, which unfortunately did not survive the pandemic. But at the very beginning, we were just starting to launch programs in March of 2020. And I thought, well, thank goodness there's no way that this can last for longer than 3 weeks, because everything will just, like, fall apart. And both of those were true. So anyway, all of that to say, my partner at the time and I created what we called loving agreements, which was essentially to really reduce our expectations of ourselves and each other in this time of massive transition and uncertainty. And I don't remember exactly what they are, but there were three. And we wrote them down on a post-it, and I had one by my desk and they had one by their desk. And especially in those early days, it reduced sniping. We
Hmm.
weren't and aren't big arguers, but there
You're
was the stress.
in a small space
Mhm.
wondering whether anybody's going to survive this.
Yes. And all of the fear that comes along with the infection rates and all of that. So those three loving agreements really did a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of that first year in terms of helping us reset every time with each other and helped that period of lockdown be one that was much more affirming than detracting
Mhm.
of our relationship.
In my relationship too, we do have agreements. One of them is we're each other's biggest cheerleaders and proponents. So, I just have a family history of relationships that are very smart and funny, but extremely denigrating of each other. That's kind of how I was raised. That's the fabric. I don't know if it's biology or just situational or whatever, but I just didn't want to be one of those couples that both tore down in person, but also tore down like when they were not there. Like if I have a problem with him or he has a problem with me, like we have the agreement, we bring it to each other. And we're not, we certainly are talking with our beloved friends about how to solve issues with our beloveds. Like, how do I get him to get the dishes out of the sink? Really? But we're looking for solutions. And I'm not talking about a problem that he doesn't understand and that he hasn't heard about. And we also have an agreement that we want to fill our relationship with more appreciations than criticisms. So we do 3 appreciations of each other every night. And that's part of our working agreements as just a couple. And certainly assume good intent is part of our agreements. But
One of the
let's,
things that Patricia and I wanted to do was give an example based on real life. And in talking about this concept, I find myself revisiting a lot of the conversations that I had with my mom about my work and about our politics. She passed away this spring, and so she is not here for me to practice and continue to build this muscle with her. But I'm thinking back to a conversation that she and I had several years ago about she was very critical about me including race in racial justice and the things that I worked on. She felt like I was being divisive in
Mhm,
the work that I do. And so Patricia and I thought, what if we stepped through an imaginary conversation with my mom about how she and I could create loving agreements to work on race.
mhm,
So the three that I came up with that I think would be really interesting to talk with my mom about, and that I think that she would at least agree to consider, even if she didn't agree with the specific agreements. Can we agree to be curious instead of critical?
mhm.
She and I both jumped to criticism really quickly, and like that friction happened really quickly anytime we tried to talk about race. So backing that out and asking more questions than staying flat statements would have helped us a lot. Can we agree to talk about personal feelings instead of generalizations? That is definitely true for both of us. My mom would say, you are creating divisiveness and not, you are really stressing me out by talking about concept XYZ. And I would say, you are ignoring injustice in the country and not saying, you are really stressing me out by misunderstanding my work. So, can we agree to talk about personal feelings instead of generalizations? That would have been so productive for us. And the last one is one that Patricia referred to a couple of minutes ago. Can we agree to assume the other person has good intentions and is doing their best? This also harkens back to one of Patricia's and my working agreements with each other, which is to resist binary thinking. We are so quick as humans. This is actually an adaptive thing that we have. We are so quick to jump to good guy, bad guy generalizations. And in a conversation where when we are disagreeing with someone, we are very fast to jump to, I am
Mhm.
the good guy and you are the bad guy. Can we assume the other person has good intentions and is doing their best? Levels that playing field.
And I just want to name the container that you're putting all of this in, and it's permission.
Yes,
So,
yes, asking permission. Can
starting
we
the
agree?
conversation, a hard conversation with, is it okay that we talk about race? When I have a conversation with a donor about money, I do the thing that I was truthfully for 20 years trained not to do. I gave them a heads up that I was coming. And I have to tell you, I raised way more money once I started doing permission based when I was going to talk about something hard. And I find it infuses my whole life now. Um, even with my partner, he at one point told me, you don't have to ask for permission, like every time that you want to have a conversation with me. And I'm like, our relationship is one of my most important relationships. Why would I be less careful with you than I am with somebody that I'm doing business with? Is it okay if we talk about, this hard thing that happened to you today? Is it okay if we talk about what I just saw? This is a hard one when you're talking to your partner. What I just saw in that interaction that you had with that Black person over there. Can
And
we talk about that? And the hard part of that is accepting if he says no.
yes, yep. He actually, I know Patricia quite well and her partner as well, and he offered to give me some advice on a situation, and he said, "Is it okay if I share some advice?" And I said, "No." And it was a little bit like watching a car stop on a dime. But I appreciated being asked. I did not want input at that particular moment. He didn't offer it, and it grew my trust in being
Right.
able to have like genuine, authentic conversations and bringing it back to move the needle. The example that I gave was, can I talk about race? Talk about jumping in the deep end, right? But
Right.
that
Right.
that's a reflection of both myself and the relationship that I had with my mom. If you are working on creating connection and trust with folks with different political beliefs and actions than you, just asking permission, can we talk about the presidential election? Can we talk about the policies of the two candidates? Can we agree on what that talking looks like? And, stipulating no yelling, no banging on the table, ask for the things that you need. It's not necessarily that you're going to get all of it, but naming those things, super helpful for yourself. And again, building trust and resilience in yourself
And
is a
it's
part of that.
really okay to tell people what you're doing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'm learning how to have hard conversations about things that I care about with people who maybe don't agree with me. Is it okay if we do X, Y, or Z? That, statement just, I think, makes you human rather than I'm coming at you with a feeling, I'm
Mm,
coming at you with some facts, whatever it is. Like the fact that you've just outed yourself as I am trying to learn how to do this in a way that is generative. And I love
mhm,
that Jess uses that word because generative conflict, it's growth, right? This is growth. And telling somebody what you're doing also allows them to maybe use this as a tool as they go forward. So, don't hesitate to tell people, I haven't tried this yet. Do you mind if I try this on you? So I love it, and it's been hard and delicious and wonderful as a tool in my little toolbox.
mm. That, friends, is boundaries and loving agreements. If you decide to try them, we would love to hear how it goes. Or if you are thinking about trying it, we would still love to hear about that. So if you end up having any questions or stories to share about that, in just a second, we're going to get into the mailbag because we have already gotten some questions and some stories. So feel free to share. We'd love to hear about your experience.
Mhm. So just a reminder, we're here Sunday evenings at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5:30 p.m. Pacific on Zoom and Instagram Live. So y'all's questions. Jess, do you want to tackle the why we had a question on one of the people who signed up for our mailing list about why white women and not just women? And I think that is juicy and delicious. And Jess, please tell us what you think.
Absolutely. I'm going to draw on a couple of other women who have said things at different times that I've heard recently that have deeply resonated with myself and this project, this work. Shannon Watts, in giving an interview on the Amendment podcast right after the call that broke Zoom, which was white women and women in general in support of Kamala Harris's recent declaration of running for the presidency. Shannon said, I think it's really important that women, white women, are willing to go through the transformational process of listening and learning. They have this power that they can use to change things for the better and not just for themselves. The Amendment is the podcast. It's hosted by the 19th newsroom. The 19th was created by women for women about women's issues in policy and politics. And it's called the 19th asterisk, which again speaks to the fact that that amendment was for white women. It granted white women the unfettered right to vote, and women of color didn't come along until 50 years later. White women operate at a unique intersection of oppression and privilege. Oppression under a patriarchal system and privilege under a racist one. As women who hold whiteness and white privilege, we have more proximity to power and resource than do our sisters and non-binary siblings of color. Learning to wield appropriate action at the intersection of gender and race is what makes our feminism truly intersectional, literally intersectional. In a culture of racist systems, which is the culture that we are in, race blindness is always going to leave people behind. Mm-hmm. And the last thought that I'll close with on this particular question is from Lila Watson, who's an Aboriginal elder, activist, and educator from Queensland, Australia. She says, if you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. If you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. I'm not here to save anyone. I am here to learn with my white sisters and NB beloveds to figure out how we can do this whole change thing better.
And how we can help each other do the change thing better with curiosity and less judgment of each other as we take different parts of the journey. That's right. Thank you. Thanks for the question. So definitely keep them coming. One other question, it was actually feedback that we got that was really wonderful feedback and made me kind of hit myself in the head. We have a registration form that I put together rather quickly so you can get on the White Women Co-Liberation Collective mailing list for conversations like these. And I had a section in there that said preferred pronouns, and you could only pick one. And I was feeling really full of myself as white ladies who are creating things like that do, and thought nothing of it, and had a lovely exchange with somebody who was like, preferred pronouns are actually marginalizing. And I wanted to check more than one box because people are many things. And it was one of those little moments that I was like, wow, okay, that is terrific feedback. The person who gave me the feedback wanted me to be better and do better and know better. And I'm going to take that into the future. So again, I could have gotten all salty about that because I was feeling really great about myself. Or I could have said, you know what, that was a blind spot. And I just wandered right into it. So the update on the registration form was a terrific bit of feedback. And if you see or hear things, please let us know. Like I said, we're learning and we want to know better and do better. And that's another reason white women helping white women, so that nobody else has to do the work. It is us as white femmes, thems, and any non-binary flavors come into this conversation to help each other and support each other so that our BIPOC community doesn't have to do the work for us. Also, I just want to let everybody know that this is a labor of love and expertise and a lot of years working on these conversations and conversations like this for Jessica and I. So, and there's infrastructure costs. If you'd like to help us defray costs for the time, labor, and experience, you can Venmo me. I'm actually looking at my Venmo thing at Patricia, Patricia hyphen Berry, Berry hyphen 38. That's the Venmo handle. Or you can send me a Zelle at Patricia Berry Consulting. And the telephone number for that would be 212-666-1555. Donations, contributions, I guess I should say, because these are not tax deductible, y'all. Contributions are welcome. So
all the content will always be free. We've actually heard from a couple of people that they wanted to be able to support our efforts. So we wanted to share how you can do that.
Mm-hmm. And I believe that brings us to the end. Do you have anything
We
that you
did
want to say, Jessica, Letaw?
just that I'm deeply happy that we got to talk about one of my favorite things.
I know we could have been here for another hour, y'all, and we're already 5 minutes over, but we're going to do it anyway.
So questions, comments, feedback, sign up for the mailing list. And the only thing that we are going to mail you about are these conversations is Move the Needle 2024 at patricia-berry.com. Again, that's Move the Needle 2024 at Patricia, Patricia-Berry, BERRY.com. We have loved being in dialogue with you between last week's conversation and this one, and I cannot wait to be back here next week. I told Patricia this morning, hers was one of my first texts. I woke up so jazzed that it was Sunday because Sunday means Move the Needle. So thank you, everybody who was able to join us. We appreciate you being here.
Bye. See you next Sunday.